The cold countryside in Canada isn't stranger to harsh weather and snow-covered grounds, and with it, even wildlife sometimes enters suburban areas. And that's also what happened to this local family. A moose suddenly showed up on their doorstep and refused to leave. It kept pestering them to the point where they even became a bit fearful. But when the husband found out why, he was left speechless. But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. The family first noticed the moose around their house on a Friday night. Rose had just checked on the children, which she did every night before going to bed herself. She was upstairs, putting on her pajamas while her husband John sat in the living room reading a book. It was quiet downstairs, something he liked, but then suddenly he heard a strange rumble in their backyard. John frowned and placed his book on the coffee table next to him. "What was that?" he said in a low voice. John heard the chamber of their bedroom close upstairs, indicating that Rose did not hear the rumbling outside. But John did, and needed to find out what caused it before he could relax. After a few quick footsteps, John reached the kitchen window which overlooked their backyard. And that's when he saw it. A giant moose was walking through their snow-covered garden. It was flapping its head from left to right repeatedly and seemed quite restless. The area where John and his family lived had large wild animals, but he had never seen one this deep in residential grounds before. John mustered some courage, opened the back door, and started screaming. "Get out! Get out of here!" he yelled from the top of his lungs. The confused family man had never been face to face with a moose before and did not know how to get rid of it, so screaming made the most sense, and his plan seemed to work. The moose made a quick jitter and then ran off. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning of their problems. John's neighbors and his wife also woke due to the screams. They hung out the windows asking what was going on. They were all slightly irritated, but when John explained why he did it, everyone went back to sleep understandingly. John did the same, but when he woke the next morning, a huge surprise awaited him on his doorstep. It was Saturday, and the newspaper always arrived early that day. John loved that Saturday morning newspaper. It was always the thickest of the week, and when he got up early, he had all the time in the world to read it by himself, his moment of peace, as he liked to call it. But this time, he noticed something different about his weekly ritual when he walked to the front door. He looked out the windows next to it, and the neighbors across the street were standing outside their house, and with them the rest of the neighborhood, it seemed. John was always the first out of bed on Saturday, so this spectacle was odd. He curiously walked toward his front door to address all the people staring at his house simultaneously. But when he opened the door, he instantly froze in place. On his porch stood a giant moose. Its feet were planted firmly in the snow, and it tilted its head forward so its lips touched John's chest while he stood in the doorway. John's neighbors all pointed and looked on in disbelief, but nobody was as shocked as John. This must have been the same moose that wandered around his garden last night, but why did it return? John steeled himself, his heart pounding as he stared into the moose's dark, unblinking eyes. With a firm shout, he tried the same tactic as last night. Shoo the animal away again. "Get out! Go on, get!" His voice echoed down the quiet street, and the moose backed up slowly, huffing. As it trotted off, John shook his head in disbelief, hoping this time would be the last. But barely half an hour later, just as the family settled in to catch their breaths, a familiar rumbling noise came from outside. Rose looked at John, her eyes wide with anxiety. "It's back, isn't it?" John moved cautiously to the front window and peeked through. Sure enough, the moose was stepping up their walkway again, its massive form casting a shadow over the porch. "Why won't it leave us alone?" Rose whispered, clutching her hands together nervously. John let out a long sigh, frustrated and perplexed. It was as if the moose had claimed their house as its own. He opened the door and yelled even louder this time, and the moose hesitated, its ears twitching before it turned, but this time, it didn't disappear away from the house down the street. Rose tried to calm their children, who were startled by the event. While Rose did this, John closed his eyes to focus on his hearing. The house shielded the moose's whereabouts, but John clearly saw it bolt around the corner of their home. "It's somewhere around here. I can hear its footsteps outside," John whispered. It went quiet for a few seconds, and then, all of a sudden, a loud snort came from the backyard. John's heart raced as he ran to the back door. This time he was met with the moose's enormous nose pressed against the glass. "What does it want from us?" Rose whispered, holding the kids close. The moose continued to stare through the glass, unblinking as if determined not to leave. John moved quietly, but then a realization entered his mind. He took out the trash around the back first thing this morning, and John was notoriously bad at shutting the door properly when barely awake. Rose also knew this, so she nervously glanced at John. But before either could react, the back door was pushed open, and the moose took a bold step into their kitchen. Chaos erupted as the family scrambled, yelling in fear. John waved his arms, trying to redirect the moose back outside, but the giant animal seemed oblivious, sniffing around as if it belonged there. "Everyone, upstairs now!" John shouted, his voice shaking. Rose and the children dashed for the stairs as the moose strolled further into the house, nudging the furniture aside. The family gathered in their bedroom, breathing heavily as they listened to the creaks and thuds from below. John could hear the moose moving through their living room, its heavy hooves echoing up through the floor. He braced himself against the door, hoping it would eventually wander back outside, but when John heard loud bangs on the stairs, he knew this wasn't the case. Suddenly, there was a soft thud on the other side of the bedroom door. The moose had followed them upstairs. Rose stifled a scream as she huddled the kids into the farthest corner of the room. John, his mind racing, knew he had to do something drastic. He motioned for everyone to stay quiet, his eyes never leaving the door as the moose continued to press against it. John pressed their bed against the door to block the animal from entering, but that wasn't a permanent solution. John knew that he needed to get help, so once the bed was in position, he inched toward the bedroom window and pushed it open. A gust of cold air filled the room as he climbed out onto the flat roof that extended over their first floor. John glanced back at his family, giving them a reassuring nod before closing the window, praying they'd be safe while he found assistance. The snow crunched beneath John's feet as he crept across the roof, his mind racing with options. He scanned the neighborhood, hoping to catch sight of anyone who could help, and while he did, the moose continued to paw at the bedroom door, persistent and unstoppable. Seeing his family's frightened faces fueled John's determination to find a solution before the creature caused further havoc. As he leaned over the roof's edge, John caught sight of his neighbor across the street, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "I need help!" John called, waving his arms frantically. Luckily, his neighbor indicated that he already called the police. "They are on their way," he said. When the police arrived, John climbed down from the roof and pointed to the front door. "The moose is upstairs, pounding against the bedroom door. My wife and kids are in there." The officers entered, ready to remove the animal, but the moose was clever. As soon as the sirens blared, it quietly slipped out the back door. John, unaware, assumed it had finally gone, but the 800-pound female had merely hidden in the backyard shed, waiting. When John freed his family, the moose reappeared. It wasn't hostile, just staring at them with sad, watery eyes. John sighed in frustration and Rose nearly screamed, but their daughter Emily stopped them. "Don't you see? It looks sad." John hesitated, then cautiously spoke. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" To his surprise, the moose grunted and stomped a hoof, responding eagerly. Encouraged by Emily's confidence, John extended a hand and touched its snout. Instead of flinching, the animal leaned into his palm, seeking comfort. Then the moose let out a loud screech and bolted outside, stopping in the front yard. "It wants you to follow," Emily insisted. John raised an eyebrow but decided to go along. He grabbed his keys and called Haley, his other daughter, to join him. Once in the car, the moose took off down the road, checking if they were still following. It snorted and grunted as if giving directions. Haley, mesmerized, watched every move. As they left their neighborhood, snowy fields replaced houses. The road wound toward the forest. "If things get too dangerous, we turn back," John told Haley. She nodded, trusting the moose completely. The drive continued deep into the tundra, the moose maintaining a steady pace. After nearly 5 miles, it slowed, then let out a haunting, panicked cry that sent chills through John. "Stay in the car, Haley," he ordered. She nodded, sensing the seriousness. Bracing against the cold, John stepped outside. Crunching through the snow, John approached the moose, pacing anxiously 300 feet ahead. Its distressing cries filled the air. As he walked closer, John suddenly slipped, realizing the snowy field beneath him was actually a frozen lake. Picking himself up, he noticed a deep crevice near the edge. His heart pounded as he peered down. Nestled at the bottom was a shivering moose calf, trapped and unable to escape. The larger moose pleaded with desperate calls. Then, everything clicked. This wasn't just any moose. This was the calf's mother. She hadn't been invading their home. She had been seeking help. John, now understanding, felt a deep sense of purpose. As a father, he knew he had to act. He sprinted back to the car where Haley was waiting. Luckily, his pickup truck had a mechanical pulley system, usually used for his lumber work, but now it had a different mission. Driving to the crevice's edge, John secured himself in the metal chain, descending carefully. The calf, sensing his intent, remained calm as he fastened the chain around its small body. "I trust you," its eyes seemed to say. With everything in place, John shouted to Haley. Familiar with the system, she confidently activated the pulley. Within moments, the calf was hoisted to safety, back beside its mother. Both John and Haley beamed with relief. They checked the calf. It was unharmed. The mother moose nuzzled her baby, her eyes filled with gratitude. What once was an unwelcome intruder was now a determined mother, fighting for her child. The mother moose locked eyes with John one last time before leading her calf back into the snowy wilderness. Haley waved, her heart full. They had answered a call for help in the most unexpected way. Back home, John and Haley recounted the story to Rose. Exhausted but fulfilled, they realized the moose had taught them something profound, that sometimes, in the most surprising ways, we are all connected.